Welcome to the Logan Bartlett Show. On this episode, you're going to hear something a little bit different. Producer Rashad Assir and I talk about the postmortem of the last 85 episodes and what we've learned about podcasting. How embarrassed are we going to be in like a year when we look back on this thing and we're like, God, this is so... We thought we had any insights to share with people, as well as the infinite mistakes we've made along the way, as well as some funny stories about the journey.
Moments that we've looked at each other and like, fuck, man, it's episode 58. Why have we not been doing this the whole time?
Mostly I fucked up the scheduling of the next guest, but I think a lot of these insights are actionable to any creator that is thinking about building something, or if you're just a loyal listener and want our retrospective on how we've gotten to where we are. I think this will be a good episode for you. So hope you enjoy it here now.
All right.
Rashad.
Logan, this is a non-standard episode. Do you want to give some context as to what we're doing here?
So we get asked a bunch about how do you make a podcast? How did all of this come to be? And I think you especially, but me at times as well, have had to have a lot of 30-minute long chats with people about our lessons learned and like what we would do and all that stuff. And so I think we've learned some interesting stuff along the way. And so we've been talking about doing this for a little while, just like a postmortem on some of the things that we figured out in making the show and producing content and building what we've built. And so some interesting lessons of like the journey, I guess, now that we're 85 episodes in. And then 25% is I fucked up scheduling a little bit and didn't have a guest. So that's the reason for timing here is we're committed to every Friday morning delivering something to you. So here we are. It's the two of us talking about this. So
yeah, it was this or no episode.
It was this or no episode, basically. So be appreciative. If you don't enjoy this, which hopefully people will, then you can pick the other path that we didn't take, which is not listening to this episode.
Totally. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of structure, I guess just to lay out kind of how we'll go through things, I figured it makes sense to kind of start at what the show was originally, how it's transformed. There's been like 2 or 3 like major transformations in the show. And I feel like each one of those we've had some big strategic learning that maybe people can also
and I think probably a small percentage of people at this point were here with us in the early days, right? Totally. It's like just based on the end of how we've grown, the people that were here in the start were not probably don't know the path.
Yeah, so maybe the whole like how this came to be is interesting. We originally started as more of a news show. You had 2 co-hosts that were one founder, operator person, and one other VC. It then evolved into just being you. We hosted a series of Web3 debates, and that took up probably 10 to 15 episodes over the summer of 2022. And then ultimately, like, how would you describe the show that we've landed at now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the product now is pretty consistent. We do interviews, conversations with important or interesting people in the broader tech ecosystem. It's probably, I don't know, someone can actually look at this, but 80% operators and tactical lessons that they've learned along the way, and 20% investors or other that and their insights about this stuff. I think our goal now in every episode is to have someone that's uniquely interesting, giving a unique perspective on actionable insights that they've gleaned along the way. And I think that product, at least based on the subscribers and stuff, it seems like people like that product enough, or at least the people that don't like it don't tell me that much. So it seems like it's working.
Well, we'll talk about the people that don't like it and very much do tell you in the comments or whatever, and how mean people can be. But also how nice and great people can be with giving feedback. And I think, one thing I was thinking about as I was going through our guest list is I feel like we are very selective in choosing guests that have really like walked the walk. Even if they haven't been on a ton of podcasts or don't have the biggest platforms. Like that's not really something we pay attention to, or I don't know, maybe that's something you can do.
In the early days, I thought like, the number of Twitter followers someone had is a mark of importance. And it's just not. It's just making good content. It's almost better if they haven't done stuff before and that they have interesting lessons that they haven't shared elsewhere is actually a better thing than how big of an audience someone has. And so I guess maybe just the genesis of the show itself was 2021 in the fall, winter, and the market was crazy for VCs. And I was like, hey, we need to do something. I need to do something to stand out more than I have. And I've been fucking around on Twitter for a while, but it was interesting, but it was very one-dimensional in my personality, and it grew. And I think I sort of figured out like how to grow it, and it was shit posting, and it was jokes and a bunch of things like that. And I wanted to do something different that allowed me to showcase a little bit more of my personality than like 140 or 280 characters, or now infinite number of characters, would allow. And so I thought, I looked at the All In Pod's success, and I was like, oh, well, if younger people in the industry could do that, that seems like clearly there's a market for it. And so that was the only real thought behind it. And so that was, I guess, December of 21. I recruited Zach and Nikita to come on and do it. We were friendly with them. And so we did a few test episodes over the course of December into January. And then you came on board and around the time. And then we sort of launched the show as basically a ripoff of All In Pod with younger people involved.
Totally. Yeah. I remember we took a bunch of inspiration from how they were running their show. It was a very news-focused pod. Like, we would find the most interesting 5 to 10 headlines about the week. Some of them would be like serious things, like whatever, Sequoia announced a fund, but then some of them was like more like Twitter news. Like, I remember there were a lot of like just like in the Twitter zeitgeist news stories that you guys would talk about. How was that experience?
Well, it's interesting, right? I think one of the lessons I've learned is people either want to be entertained or they want to be educated. And I don't think we had that thesis early on. We were just sort of like, oh, this is working. We saw something else that was working and was like, all right, let's put a spin on it. And I think founders probably can often take inspiration from something else and iterate around something. And so it wasn't more thoughtful than that. It wasn't like, oh, I asked myself what deeply appeals to me as a person and that I'm really going to want to commit to for an extended period of time. It was just kind of like, oh, that works for those guys. We can do our own.
It wasn't a lot of market testing.
No, there was zero. It was
how many people did you talk to? I imagine you must have talked to some people about like, hey, I'm thinking of starting a podcast. What should I do?
Yeah, people. But at the end of the day, the thesis of, hey, All In podcast, but younger people is like, no one's going to say that's a bad idea. Like that could still work today. I don't know. Someone probably will do that well. And so like if you get the right formula of people in place, then that could totally work. Yeah. What I found is that I fucking hated it. I like really, really hated it. I'm not that interesting in my opinions on stuff generally, or like this stuff I know I can go really deep on, but the stuff I don't know, I don't like doing drive-by commentary and hot takes around. And it's just like, if you're going to give opinions about stuff, I wanted to be really informed and well-versed in it. And you can't do that if you're going to be like effectively a talking head. And so I hate it.
Well, also you have a full-time job, as did the other two guys that were, even equally or less prepared than you were to sort of have these takes.
Totally. And so just like shooting from the hip on news commentary, you expose yourself to a lot of, you're either not going to be interesting because you're too muted on stuff, or you're not going to be insightful or like have a real perspective on stuff, or people are going to call you a dumbass, right? And like none of those things I particularly liked. And so we did that for how long? 10 to 12 episodes?
It was like around 12 episodes.
12 episodes.
Went to Miami, and that's when you interviewed Keith, and that was like
and we had Nikita was starting Gas at the time, and so he had different time commitments he could make to it, and then Zach's firm wanted more oversight of like the review and process and all that stuff, and so ultimately those things came at odds with our ability to put something out consistently because you needed people to talk about things that were topical, right? And like those people constrained with time and people that wanted like to review stuff just doesn't lead to publishing quickly.
The review thing is interesting. It doesn't sound like a huge deal of like, oh, just send it to them. They'll, redline it a little bit. But when you're trying to turn around an episode in 1 to 2 days, like the operational friction that adds, the Justin's here sitting off camera, our editor, having to go late nights to just like get an episode released on Friday consistently, because that was our thing. We were like, we're gonna release an episode on Friday. Was a huge pain in the ass.
And especially if like you have three people talking and we all agree and come up with something interesting, and then someone else is like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think so. That's like it's hard enough to make a good product, and then it's really hard to make a good product and then, whatever, be handicapped in some way in what you can say. Our thesis was, I think, one that could work, but for different reasons, none of us particularly could do it. Right. Yeah. And it just kind of, it sucked. I really, it gave me so much anxiety. I did not enjoy that.
Did you consider bailing? Like, I know there's statistics out there about how few podcasts make it beyond 10 episodes. Like, were you like about to throw in the towel?
Yeah. What those stats are like,
it's something crazy. Here.
Yeah. Here we have. Yeah. Pull it up. What is it?
It's okay. So 90% of podcasts don't get past episode 3. That's 1.8 million people who quit. Of the ones left, 90% will quit after 20 more episodes. And then to be in the top 1% of podcasts in the world, you only need to publish 21 episodes.
So my thought process on it was I set different mental milestones, and I was like, all right, I'm going to do 4 episodes. That was like all I committed to do. And then we collectively agreed to do 12. And then at 12 was really the fork in the road thing. And we had built some muscle memory and infrastructure internally at Redpoint of how to do this. You had come on board. We had started working with Justin. It was like we were a little committed in some ways to figuring out how to do this. And so I felt some obligation to like keep pushing on because we started it. And I also just don't like those stats, right? I just sort of knew that persisting in some form would lead to something. If nothing else, I would learn from it. And it was a grind. It still is a grind, right?
And the market backdrop of this is peak. This is pre like market turn.
This is while the market kind of was turning, right? So I wanted to do something in a point in time in which I wouldn't have had time to do it. And then the market's like slowing down when I actually had time to do it. So it worked out pretty well then. But yeah, so we persisted into it. I looked at the Jimmy Kimmels and the David Lettermans and the Jay Leno's and Jon Stewart's and whatever, all those people. And the model they have works pretty well. It's like you do news and topical stuff, and then you do interviews and conversations. And people come for the guest, but they stay for the current events and the news. And that format really works. If you're willing to shoot from the hip, you're smart enough to do that, or you're willing just to expose yourself to hot takes and stuff, or you have time to do this as
you have an entire writer's room writing jokes, or you're charismatic like Jimmy Kimmel or
totally,
whatever, like
totally.
Things.
And even then, if you go back and listen to like Kimmel talk about his early days, he like says he wasn't good at it, right? And that's someone that's like insanely talented. And so that format clearly works. There's a reason people do it. And so I was like, all right, well, we'll just keep doing this. But it was like I had 3 jobs. It was, hey, I had to stay up with current events. I had to interview a guest and have, and also book guests. And then I had my actual job as well. And all of those were like different things. And especially the ephemerality of news cycles and stuff. You couldn't backload a bunch of episodes or something. It was like you couldn't can them and release them.
I mean, sometimes we'd record Thursday, and by Saturday, our release day, it would already be dead.
Yeah, exactly. It was like the news cycles were so tight, and it was just a hard product to keep going. But we kind of evolved for a while, and I couldn't find a co-host to come on and do anything with me. It's really hard just to talk behind a mic by yourself and give opinions and stuff. It's much easier to banter with someone. And so then Weinberg and I, Zach from Flatiron, now Curie Bio, was kind of a lightning rod. He's uniquely talented in a bunch of vectors of he's just very smart. He doesn't give a fuck. He has a ton of credibility. And he was the one that I kept trying to recruit in, thinking, all right, I can be diplomatic and not as interesting, and he can be a lightning rod and very interesting. And it worked really well with him, which led to the all the crypto stuff as well, where he would just kind of rail on crypto and debate people and all of that. And that was like that was lightning in a bottle of people just loved that. And there's a reason debates, presidential debates, or like whatever, people yelling at each other and arguing points like they will on All In podcasts. There's a reason it works well. It's just like high entertainment and high education as well, because you get to feel out 2 points. And so that was like a real lightning in a bottle kind of moment.
Yeah, I was going back and listening to some of the crypto debates episodes. We had probably 10 or 12 people come battle Zach. And these were like very credible people in the crypto world.
Yeah.
And yeah, those episodes were great. We were still doing news as well, and we were having guests on. So what was the major learning from that chapter where we were doing crypto debates? We had evolved from 3 co-hosts to just you, and you were still doing a combination of news, bringing on people you like, and crypto debates.
I would say that they're like the founding principle of what you enjoy doing and having people committed with you to go do that. I think that's probably true of those entire periods of time. And the crypto debate thing, or that debate format, again, it could have worked if Zach could have committed the time to doing it. And I don't know if I would have been happy doing it, but I probably could have.
You were pretty adamant about, like, I remember there were 3 or 4 episodes where you were like, this is our last one. Like, this is going to be the last crypto debate because I don't want us to just be a crypto debate podcast where people are screaming at each other.
And at some point, like, clearly the market runs out of that content, and then you become known for something that isn't what your brand was. And so I think the biggest lesson that I learned as we started to do the interviews and stuff, and this is true for any podcast, is you really need to niche down into what it is that you're going to have your product as. And so whenever I talk to someone, maybe you're Mark Cuban, or you're the Smartless guys, or you're the Strike Force 5, like some of these podcasts that have come out where they're actual celebrities themselves, and they're able to be interesting in their own right and talk and whatever. And those people are just supremely gifted. And otherwise, one, you're going to have to really work at what it is that you do, and you're going to start out really shitty. It's just like whatever product you pick, you're going to be really bad at early on. And 2, you really should be in the top 1% of where you're going to start, and then build concentric rings around that. And so the TAM initially for content should be really small. And that's like really counterintuitive to people. And I made that mistake. I was like, who are the most interesting people that I can get on to interview?
Right.
And I'll just get them to tell their story, and that will be interesting.
Yeah.
And actually, like, no one but their companies or their coworkers or their family really care about their story.
Even for someone as big as, I mean, we had Mark Cuban on, we had Kara Swisher on, and they were great guests, but did they perform like disproportionately higher than your average founder that we bring
and that's the other thing is people have if people are like big Kara Swisher fans, they can go hear her 5 times a day or whatever it is, right? And Mark Cuban you can hear from a lot. And so a big lesson of that was not just like go for breadth of or like famousness or whatever or notoriety. It's like niche down into the content that you want to deliver to people that is actually uniquely interesting, that you're uniquely able to provide. And I think the mistake I made was just like, oh, I'm going to chase the people that are the biggest that I can find.
Who's the biggest name that I can
Who's the biggest name I can get, and I'll just get them to tell their story. And people don't really care. Like, that's the fact of the matter is, like, if they're really big, they can hear them other places and get their story other places. Yeah. And so that was a really interesting learning and mistake. And then also my interests don't align with everyone else's interests. And so if left to my own devices, I would just go pursue some smattering of like B2B software and
NCAA.
Yeah, exactly. College football coaches. Yeah. I would go just like
hip hop.
Yeah, exactly. Some hip hop rappers. And like instead you need to think about who your core audience is and who gives a shit, and then build out from what they would want to hear to be educated or entertained around that. And that was something that I didn't even know who our core audience was, who we were trying to appeal to, what we were trying to teach them or educate them on. Yeah. I was just kind of like, oh, founders or other people that like tech stuff, right? And that's that's not, you can get that from a bunch of different places, from people that are far more entertaining than I am.
Totally. And we also constrained ourselves.
You said totally a little too quick after entertaining than me. That was supposed to be like a deprecating joke, and you're like, yeah, you fucking loser. Yeah.
Yeah, the idea of you being entertaining.
Yeah.
We constrained ourselves to a caliber of guests too that was like really high. To your point about the niche thing, like if you find a niche, Lenny was a great example of this with the product stuff. Like you don't have to find like mega famous people to talk about that. You just have to talk to people that really know that field.
I have so much respect for Lenny and Lex Friedman and Harry Stebbings and these people that started with like, you need to start really small. And Lenny was like, the people he get aren't notable in their own right for the most part. There's some that are, but they're people that are real practitioners in their domain. And a lot of people care about product, and he gets them to give very actionable insights, right?
Yeah.
As you expand from there, you can start putting more loops around it and go. I mean, Harry's name of the show is still 20 VC, right? But he interviews Scooter Braun or whoever it is, like just different people all the time. And so you can build, or Lex Friedman used to be the AI podcast, and then he has like Kanye West coming on now.
Totally.
And so like you can evolve, but you have to have a core foundational base of people. And you have to have the answer to the question of why they should give a shit about you versus infinite content out there. There's infinite things they can go watch, and you're not competing with like just the other people in the market that you're thinking about. It's like, oh, well, I just need to be better than the other tech podcasts.
Or
it's
all
like,
in.
Yeah. No, you actually need to be better than anything else anyone can do with their time.
Totally.
Right. And so
binging shows on Netflix, scrolling
going
on
to a bar with their friends, like going to a movie, watching sports, like you're competing with all of these things. And so your competition, and that's why I don't mind saying this stuff, is like, we're not, I want to help people start their podcasts and get going, because ultimately there's no market share capture really from me. I am friends, and a lot of people have been magnanimous in their support of me along the way. The Acquired guys have been super helpful. Eric Torenberg has been super helpful. Jason Calacanis has been very magnanimous with me. Harry Stebbings has been very kind. Like all these people, I'm sure I'm forgetting a bunch of people that have been helpful along the way, but they've been very nice because we're not at competition really with one another. We're competing with TikTok, and we're competing with whatever, going to a bar with your friends, not each other.
Within this chapter of we were starting to do interviews, I was going through episodes like 25 to 35, and we did have a few episodes that resemble what we do now. A few of them being Parker Conrad. We had come tell his story and give a bunch of operating lessons that is still today one of the best.
I think that feels. I feel like it feels the same product today, and which was kind of accidental in that it worked out that way. But it ended up being. And the other thing that was interesting with him is I did all this prep. Like I do a ton of prep before these things, and I did both of those, or I did that in person, and I felt like there was something that people would tell better stories in person. I just felt that, and I didn't have any evidence to support it, but it just really felt like the difference might not be apparent to the listener of like the quality of audio. If you're just listening on Apple Podcasts, you might have no idea.
The numbers weren't also substantially like validating that in person was.
I would actually say all of this stuff in the early days was mostly like intuition for the most part. Like had we just listened to the numbers, we would have been a crypto debate podcast, and we would be reeling now, trying to like pivot and find our own way. So the numbers didn't support spending the effort to be there in person with people. Scheduling, there were all these constraints of I had like 4 different vectors of constraints that presented themselves. One was the caliber of the guest, and so that holding that bar high. One was quality of the conversation, so the ability to have deep dive conversations with folks and being like I was well researched in it. One was doing in person versus virtual, and then one was releasing every Friday. And those 4 things, even still today, are at odds with one another, right? It's like all of those. At some point, it's going to break. I just can't do all of those things. And the consistency one is one that I debate. Like, especially now, I have a wedding coming up, and I'm going to be on a honeymoon, and will I be able to keep up the consistency thing? For the most part, though, everyone that is successful is fairly consistent. The Acquired guys are the ones that is the exception, and they do so much research and go so deep on it. And so those things were all at odds with one another. But in the Parker Conrad example, what I found was I knew every interview he had ever done, and somehow in person, which was just an intuition. He told the story of David Sachs and him and Zenefits, which he had never told before. And I assume it was under like some non-disclosure agreement or something. And I don't know why he decided to tell it there. He was comfortable with me, and we got going in the conversation.
I bet he wouldn't. There's no chance he would have told that story virtually.
0%. If he had been staring into the camera, knowing it was like recording, there's no chance. And a similar thing happened with Palmer Luckey when he told the story of getting fired from Facebook, right? He had never told the story so in depth and all the specifics around it. And I went and read a book about all the stuff before. So I was very well researched when I went into that conversation, and he just went for it. And I know he was under NDA with a lot of stuff. And he was like, come after me if you choose, I think was his mindset. I don't know.
He dealt with enough of that.
Totally.
He felt probably like comfortable dealing with it.
And so that was an intuition and a learning and something we've mostly stayed consistent to. There's been some times in which we haven't been able to make it work for whatever travel related reasons, but I think that's held true. And even still today, we've had episodes maybe in the last couple of months in which people said things they definitely shouldn't have. And their PR teams came back to us like pleading because realizing we were maybe going to make national news.
We had already clipped it and made it the intro, and we had all these animations.
Yeah, in the fullness of time.
Fuck.
Yeah, we've had 2 of those in the last like 2 or 3 months of things that like the PR teams were very much like, and that's actually an interesting other thing is there's this weird dichotomy of these people, especially those that don't do a lot of interviews, they want some type of ability to strike stuff. And I actually like giving them that comfort because then they know they're not like, they let loose a little bit in the conversation, knowing they can take it back after the fact. Most people don't take us up on that. And then when they do, it's really fucking frustrating because you're sitting there and it's like, oh my gosh, this is so good. And then maybe we'll release, when I'm my will, I'll just let them rip.
Deleted scene.
Yeah. Just like all the things that are like would have been national news stories or something, which weirdly we've had a couple of those things come out, but it's very rare stuff gets taken out, but when they do, it's usually the really salacious stuff. So those are like tensions around it. But the in-person thing has been really beneficial too. And I think we realized that during that stretch.
100%. And to your point about consistency, because I've gone back and forth of like, does it really matter? I think it matters for a few reasons. One, it's just like holding yourself accountable to actually doing something. Because if you give yourself license like, we'll just release on Sunday, it's a very slippery slope to Sunday becomes Monday to becomes, we'll just skip this week and we'll go next week. Well, maybe we should just do it every other week. And then all of a sudden, like you're not producing nearly as much as you would. And so that's the first point. The second point ties to a broader thing of just like building trust with your audience, which is what this is all about. No one episode is going to make you a huge podcast. You might get a banger and it'll get you some new listeners and they'll come along for the ride. But like ultimately, you need to be doing something consistently over time very well and giving your listeners the sort of the certainty that like, I have a workout class every Tuesday. I go home, I make dinner, I put on YouTube, and my show is going to be there. And if it's not there, I'm a little disappointed. And so like,
you go find something else that's going to fill that spot.
Exactly.
And you risk, it's interesting, the slope of the line and the graph that we have on the listenership. And I'm going to describe this for people that aren't watching video here. But basically when you start, everyone, you get a ton of like drive-by people that are willing to listen because it's like, oh, maybe this is a product for me.
Yeah.
And it turns out like for the vast majority of them, it's not a product for them. And this is if you launch with something of a audience, like I had a big Twitter audience. And so the vast majority of people didn't like the product. They were like, oh, this guy's not as funny as I thought he was or something. Or like, he's a little, this is not what I expected. Like, make some more jokes. And so you get a bunch of churn initially, and that continues to happen. People will give you a second shot, a third shot, a fourth shot, or whatever it is. But then you bottom out at some point, and then you start to compound on the way back up. And so the consistency of building that audience of people that listen to you is just really important. And what they're coming for is delivering it every time and setting the expectations that you're consistently going to deliver that. One of the interesting dichotomies as well is like you suck when you initially start. You just do. Like, no one's naturally good at any of this stuff. And so when your bias is like, oh, let me get the biggest guests I possibly can as my initial episode. And weirdly, that's kind of a terrible idea, because you're going to be at your worst at that point in time, and your audience is going to maybe come in but then bottom out because they're not going to like you, or they're not going to like the product, or whatever it is. And so there's this weird tension of like, how big of a guest do you launch with, keeping them going and incremental, but also you being bad. And that's a very weird thing, is like, you're at your worst and you're trying to get more people to come on. And so I think the best podcasts, for the most part, start out random, and then they compound. The people like aren't notable people in the industry for whatever reason, and then they compound over time as they get better. And so by the time most people discover it, they've refined how they do things, right? And so you go look at the people that I admire or like talk to or whatever. I mean, the Acquire guys started out with a very small listenership and just kept compounding over time. Patrick O'Shaughnessy, same thing. Harry Stebbing, same thing. Lenny, like, started a newsletter and then to a podcast, same thing. Lex Friedman, same thing. All these folks started in relative anonymity, and they built a good product and got more people to come in. And I think that's a interesting sort of thing that you just need to work through. You're not going to be very good initially, right? I don't know if we still are, but we're better than we were. So,
for sure.
So we kept at that. It weirdly kind of times to the rebrand as well, for the most part. I think by early December, we were mostly doing the same product, doing standalone single interview releases, I think, for the most part, by November, December of last year, without a ton of news. I don't exactly remember the timeline, but then we rebranded in January, and we've been more or less the same product since then, for the most part, with the occasional exception of like whatever SBF but SBF too, but SVB goes under or whatever, like
Elon bought Twitter,
some like topical episodes and stuff, which I think we'll continue to do, or we don't have a guest booked and we just sort of talk about ourselves for a while.
Well, this is the first of its kind, maybe the last, but
we'll see how it does.
Hey guys, Rashad here. I'm the producer of the Logan Bartlett Show and wanted to take a quick second to make an ask. We are close to 10,000 subscribers and are trying to get there by the end of the year. If you're enjoying this conversation and these episodes, please consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. Now back to the show. So how would you describe it? Because we've gone back and forth on trying to create a tagline for the show, and it's some combination of like untold stories of, Silicon Valley to, we emphasize a lot of like tactical, you can learn something from this to go apply it to, if you're a founder, an operator, or even an investor, like there are stories that you can take away from this, or things that from a hiring perspective, the best question to ask when you're interviewing executives, or how to launch your second product.
I don't even know what the right description is, and this is why we don't have a good tagline, obviously, but it's some combination of stories, which are certainly interesting and powerful at times, and then the actionable insights as well. And I think the stories are the entertainment and the insights are the education, right? It's sort of like when you think about that dichotomy.
Totally.
And so pulling those things out, everyone has a story to tell, but there's only so many elements of someone's life that is particularly interesting. And so going all storytelling and narrative narrows your TAM a little bit. And then going all actionable insights, I think, can work. And if I had to bias, I would probably bias towards more actionable insights. But I personally enjoy the human side of pulling things out of people as well. And so I don't want to give up on the storytelling thing and elements of that. And so I think the product that I hope people walk away with, both the guest and the listener, is something of a definitive account of, at that moment in time, that person's journey, as well as their learnings. And I don't know what pithy little tagline that ties into, but I think that's the consistent product we've kind of come on. And now we've reached this, there's this funny referential element of like, when you keep on up-leveling your guest, but the guests also want validation from other people coming on. And so there's this funny little flywheel that you just keep building on of like, well, X person went on and X person's important. So like, okay, now, and each person, no one wants to feel like it's the most important podcast they've ever been on. That was actually I reached out to Naval one time. We were in or I bumped into him in Miami, and I asked him, and he's like, I went on Rogan, I think it was, and he's like, and I never wanted to go on a podcast less important than the one I've been on before, and so I'm never doing another
podcast.
That's what he said. He's like, I'll do Tim Ferriss because he helped break me in the early days and like make me important. But he's like, I'm not doing podcasts anymore. And I was like, interesting. So if you break that in a ball, you motherfucker, you lied to me. But it's an interesting thing of like, that's a funny social proof of just the compounding that people want the validation. We think about that, right? I still do all the outreach today to guests. I still do all the prep today. We've tried to outsource that, and I don't know, I'm too OCD. At some point, scalably, I might need more support than I actually do from a research standpoint. But there is a funny thing of how I craft cold emails to public company CEOs and say why they should come on. And I would say half our guests at this point are cold outreach, and half our guests are some referral in. Yeah. And the cold outreach, it's like, okay, well, I know this person probably views that person as a peer or someone that I know will entice them a little bit. And that's like an interesting thing of keeping all this stuff going.
Is this the same outbounding strategy that you use to get founders to talk to
100%.
you? Yeah.
It's the exact same thing. It's just I've
seen some of your notes and I'm like, this is.
It's like, what can I interestingly and uniquely say to get this person to spend time doing this? And there's a staging as well of like, waiting for, okay, I'll wait for that episode to release because then the other person will be more inclined to go do it, right? And I also think by not screwing over PR teams at times, by doing a ton of research in advance, we try to walk away with the other person feeling like they really enjoyed it. And now I think people recommend it to other people, and I get former guests referring in their friends and being like, oh yeah, you should do that.
I think we've been like, since we kind of started doing that naturally, and now we've kind of built that into our brand of like, we want to be one of the most well-researched interviews that you're going to hear. So you can go listen to 15 interviews of Mark Cuban, but like the one that the Logan Bartlett Show does is going to be more in depth, more nuanced. Like clearly we have done the prep coming in, and then also the guest is going to like us coming out of the interview.
Yeah,
like, that's an important,
certainly a goal. Like you don't want to be confrontational. I could probably count if I don't know how many interviews we've done, 65 or something. I could probably 70. I don't know what the number is, but there aren't many people that walked away, I think, feeling like they didn't get what they signed up for in it. So I think for the most part, I don't like giving questions in advance to people. But if they really want it, it's like whatever. Right. At the end of the day, I want them to be proud of the product as well, which we found is actually an important thing. The sharing and all that, I think is an interesting. Harry Stebbings originally did a really good job of that, of like making sure the guests shared it and then asking other people for questions in advance and then asking those people to share it on the behalf. And there's like, that was definitely something I thought we were above, was like asking guests to share the episode.
So important.
But that's been an unlock in the last 6 months, 9 months of just like leaning into that as well, which is just a little lesson. And it feels like you're above, like, oh, I don't want to plead with my guest to share it or whatever. It's
I
like,
will
no.
happily plead.
Yeah. Sometimes you plead.
Because it makes a huge difference. And it's like they're sharing it with their audience. So we'll have, Jody Bonzal on, and he has 50,000 LinkedIn followers that have been following him for years because of what a great, executive he is. And then he'll be like, here's an hour and a half of me sharing my operating secrets.
Yeah. And then you retain X people.
Of course they're going to listen.
That's the thing, is there's a very natural bounce rate of people, but you retain and compound, right, over time. And the end you start with is important. Then the consistency of delivering what their expectations are important. And then you retain some percentage of them, and then that compounds over time, right?
I want to hit some of these other sort of like, again, we are far from a perfect product. We have room to evolve.
How embarrassed are we going to be in like a year when we look back on this thing and we're like, God, this is so, we thought we had any insights to share with people.
It's more framed as mistakes of things that we've completely fucked up so far. But what are some other moments that we've looked at each other and like, fuck, man, it's episode 58. why have we not been doing this the whole time? I think some other ones I can think of is like really leaning into video. We made it a point to, I think episode 1 is on YouTube still. Like we were releasing it video, and honestly, we probably shouldn't have released that video on video. Now
episode 1 definitely isn't on YouTube, but like episode 4 or something
or whatever.
Yeah,
but like
we should take that down.
We didn't know how to do video at all. We didn't know how to we were just treating it as a listening product on YouTube. So I kind of I think we treat listening, and maybe Spotify's just in the middle because they actually accept video, but then YouTube is its own beast, and then listening as its own beast. But with the listening platforms, there's only so much you can do to get people to listen to.
It's a dumb RSS pipe that if you listen to Apple Podcasts, like there's no the analytics you get back are terrible. There's no like algorithm that's
maybe
recommending anything.
You can favorite a show or you can follow a show. I don't even really know what that.
But that's it. But it's not like it's very simple, and it's all feed based. Like just an RSS feed.
The benefit of that is that like I think you'll have more recurring listeners, or like once people are, that sort of Tuesday night, I'm going to listen to it while I go for a run type listener, they're going to keep coming back to it. And
that's definitely the biggest historical market for podcasts, quote unquote, is that like Apple Podcasts.
Right. I'm cooking, put it on, and, make my dinner while I learn how to get better at my job.
Yeah. Shows that call themselves podcasts, the majority of those are consumed on Apple Podcasts for sure. Now, then there's Spotify, which is a little bit in the middle of like, it's more algorithmic. There's recommendations. We get better analytics back from them. You can do video on it, ratings, all that stuff is
chapters. You have some level of interactivity, but for the most part, it's still kind of a dark hole of like, you publish it, like anyone can go release a podcast, publish it. It'll show up the same as a very well-established podcast.
Yes, and they're getting better at it. They're pushing on a lot of the algorithmic iterations and stuff.
Maybe one day they'll figure out discovery, but until then, like it's really not worth devoting our attention on those things, because all we can do is produce the best podcast listening show that we can, and then release it and hope that people go listen to it. Now, YouTube is where we've probably spent. It's not the majority. I don't know what percentage of our listenership it actually makes up, but it's certainly where we spend the majority of our time.
It's by far the fastest growing.
And it's the fastest growing. And you have the opportunity for like these mega bangers. I don't know what Eliezer did. Probably close to 200,000 views. Like you're just not going to get that on some of these other platforms.
It goes viral. It quite literally goes like viral within the YouTube algorithm, which is not like you can't go viral on the Spotify algorithm, or you can't go viral on the Apple Podcast algorithm, right? YouTube is its own beast. So,
and as much of more of a pain in the ass it is it's like 500% more work to do a podcast that has video, but
the reward is like, I mean, the potential and the number of knobs you can twist on.
It's more fun. I find it way more fun than like.
But it's infinite. It's actually. Do you hear Mr. Beast talk about this stuff?
Yeah.
It's insane the level of algorithmic sophistication and like content iteration you can do. I mean, our thumbnails, how enticing you make the thumbnails to click on, the intro, how long it takes you to set up a guest, how you introduce the person, what kind of context you give in advance versus getting right into the conversation itself. Like there's just so many dials that you can twist on YouTube, not to mention YouTube Shorts, which is its own kind of algorithmic, TikTok clone. There's just descriptions, chapters,
intros, like how you entice someone to click through, and then how you get them engaged in the first minute, and then how you retain them. Like we literally have a different video editing treatment for the first 15 minutes because we know that that's the most important time for people.
And then it compounds, right? And so if you get better click-through rates because of the thumbnail, and you get better listener, like less drop-off, then it shows more people. And so it's just all the effort that you can put into that is rewarded in an algorithmic way. And it's just like, you have to iterate on it and just keep getting better. Each episode, we're like a little better at YouTube, and we're still not great at it. I don't know, would you recommend to someone today to start YouTube first? And if you're thinking you want to do a podcast, is this like worth the squeeze of everything? Or like first validate that you at least want to do 12 episodes or 20 episodes or 50 episodes and then go there over time?
if you don't have the time, if all of your attention is going on the show itself, I'd say it's better used there. If you feel like you have a good premise though, and you have a decent show idea, and you have some time to focus on video, then I'd say it's worth uploading to YouTube.
And the other thing is, YouTube's the only one that has listener and viewer numbers public, right? Yeah. And so it's, if you're starting, it's a delicate balance of like starting and everyone's going to see how many people listen to it, unless
it's going to suck.
Yeah. And so you're going to want to keep improving it, and you're rewarded for improving it, but it's a ton of fucking effort to improve it, and the amount of iterations and stuff. I think today, if you were to say, let's take out the core product itself, like the stuff that, for the most part, my research, outreach, whatever, all that stuff, and then the scheduling, we get someone there and we get a product set up and recorded. Everything in post, what percentage of time do you think goes to YouTube versus Spotify and Apple? Spotify and Apple in a bucket together.
It's got to be 80 plus.
That's what I would guess. Is 80%. Maybe
we don't actually do much to the actual episode. Like the conversation that gets had between you and the guest is, for the most part, what gets published, with the exception of the PR stuff and whatever. But
I would say everything that goes into Apple and Spotify benefits YouTube. And so like that's a base of what an episode is. And then all the bells and whistles is incremental on top of that, and different for YouTube, which has been a very interesting learning. And I guess it's just something that you need to keep working at and getting better. And on an Apple podcast, making one episode or thumbnail or title better than the prior one, you'll never know if it actually worked. On YouTube, like, the click-through rate percentage that you can see on the episode is just like, it's very incremental from one episode to the next. And so you learn so much more, and you can keep improving and optimizing.
And it's fun to sort of obsess. I mean, sometimes it drives you crazy, but like, at least you have some visibility. Like Spotify, it's like, oh, this episode got X thousand downloads. Like, okay, great. I don't really know what was driving that or what wasn't. On YouTube, you're like, oh, this many people are coming in from a LinkedIn promotional post that you can literally see like the inbound traffic. You can see what the click-through rate is. You can see how many people YouTube is showing to. And all of those things are very motivating if you're the sort of operator behind the scenes, like trying to make this thing big. It like gives you something to go off of, to be like, okay, next week I hope we do better in these different things. And I think that ties to a point of just like, if you are thinking about doing a podcast or doing a podcast, and it can be so frustrating at times because you fucked up the intro and it published, and you're like, God, that was a really good episode. But it's so important to just like put that behind you, keep going forward, and really just focus on like getting all of the things that you need for a good episode right. And it's so many things, but like, and none of them individually will make or break an episode, but you just got to keep doing them all right.
I found that like learning, like looking back, but not agonizing over it, and looking in the distance, like looking one episode back and learning, but not agonizing, and then keeping your eyes on downfield on how many you need to do, is the most important psychological thing. And so like every episode we do a postmortem on like what we did right, what we didn't do right, all that we learned from it. But then it's kind of snap and move on, with the exception of the Keith Hrabovsky Miami incident, when they fucked up the audio. And I still want to, if I see those guys in the street,
I don't think I've ever been so emotionally distraught from something that happened at work as I was with, do you want to tell the story of, well, I mean, the production, we hired a production company in Miami. Like, we have our New York guys, we have our SF people, because that's most, 90% of the episodes we shoot. But Miami Tech Week, we always do an episode with Keith Hrabovsky. So we had this like local production crew in Miami. I almost want to like link that. No, dox them. But
yeah. And they just like, they were an audio crew and they just messed up the audio.
They just fucked up the audio, and then we're just like very unapologetic about it after the fact. And they were like, yeah, no, we mentioned it to Logan like midway through the interview. Like, we asked him to re-record. It's like, motherfucker, we're not going to re-record 45 minutes. Like, Keith Hrabovsky has 90 minutes to record with us. Like, this is very important time.
And like you have one job. It's just like
just monitor the fucking camera.
Just like tell us that it's good to go, right? Gosh. So with the exception of that still pisses me off. I think everything else is kind of like snap and move on after you do the postmortem, but keeping your eyes downfield on like get incrementally better each episode, but keeping your eyes. I committed to, I said 4 episodes and 12 episodes, and I think it was 6 months, then 12 months, then another year.
Yeah.
And so January 31st or whatever of this year, we'll sign up mentally. There's no like obligation. We don't have any advertisers or anything, but we're going to sign up for another season, presumably, and that will be another year. And we'll see if we want to keep doing it. But psychologically, just the commitment to keep going is helpful, and not to agonize too much about the past. The other interesting thing from an interview standpoint, and I think I can probably speak to that best, although we obviously tried other formats, is your inclination is to tell a story kind of linearly in a way of like, okay, give me your background and where you went from there. And
right.
I found that jumping around and we don't really reorder the episode in terms of how it happens, but sometimes we've pulled forward a segment of the conversation, right? We feel like it's appealing, and we'll reorder.
Your first 20 minutes matters more than your last 20 minutes because more people are listening, so we want to put
and like if they've stuck with you for an hour, right, they'll stick with you most likely for another 15 minutes versus the chances that they don't make it past the 10th minute if the content isn't interesting is decently high. But asking questions in a way up front that makes people feel comfortable, but then also be willing to dive into the meat of like what you want to get to is an interesting, just like tactical thing. And so one of the things that I do when I get together, most of these people at this point I've never met before, and we've interacted on email a little bit and maybe had good banter, or maybe I got passed off to a PR team pretty quickly. But getting like 10 minutes ideally with them, just riffing initially, making them feel a little comfortable. And even when we start recording, the first like 5 minutes or something, talking to them in a way that allows them to warm up a little bit, rather than if you went to the gut of the conversation that you wanted to really ask about initially, their guards definitely up a little bit more. And so I found the longer I spend with people in advance, the more I kind of am able to warm them up. If they get there 15 minutes early, generally I know that we'll have a great discussion. I've tried to do some prep calls before with people to like get them on and say, these people are so busy and it feels it's probably worthwhile. Maybe that'll be something in a year that I'll look back on.
As we have grown, we've earned the license to ask for more from our guests. We used to do 1 hour, now we do 2 hours, and that can be one thing that we ask for in the future. But
that's decently onerous, actually, of people. We're asking at least 2 hours from all of these people, and with the most part, we get that. And these are very busy, important people in the
hourly
world.
Rate on
the per hour rate.
Daniel Eck.
Yeah, not worth fucking up their audio. Yeah. So I think that's been something that we've been able to do with time. And I think when you look at Lex Friedman or Joe Rogan or some of those, like they've gotten longer because they've earned the right to be longer with the guest. The guest is going to come in and sit there and really go through all the different stuff in their career. And I feel like we've gotten more to a point that not only has our guest quality gotten better, but their willingness to dedicate the time to doing it has gotten a lot better too. So,
do you want to talk about People Are Mean and how you've maybe balanced like taking the feedback we get in the comments on YouTube? Some of it we've actually like because it can be mean and true.
Oh, totally. I think I actually think every episode has a fair thing to criticize, and stylistically, there's a lot of things that you can criticize me for that I want to be better at.
The question asking thing is like the most recent one where I think
totally. I'm like in my effort to make people feel comfortable at times I can be a little circular in my question asking, and I've gotten better at it, but someone called it out one time. I don't know if we want to tell people this because now they'll be listening to hear me ask random questions and stuff. But someone once called it, they're like, just get to the fucking question already. And I'm like, good feedback.
Yeah.
I was
like, you hurt my feelings, but
yeah, true. This guy spends more time building up to a question than asking it or something. And I'm like,
I actually put him up to that.
Yeah, exactly. Paid him to do it. But it is a funny balance of like, that feedback is definitely true. My energy is to get people more comfortable. And so I don't go to the crux of the question initially sometimes, which can definitely be.
And it's easy to look at that comment and be like, have the attitude of like, well, you fucking interview, whoever, or like, you don't understand. It's tough. Like you're high stakes conversation.
And then you're yelling at an anon Twitter or like YouTube reply person. Yeah.
But it's important to take that stuff in. And I think you're actually very accessible. This is something people, if you made it this far, should know, is like you are very accessible on Twitter. I think you respond
YouTube.
A lot on email, like YouTube comments.
Yeah. I think every nice comment I've ever gotten, I've tried to respond to in some way, in whatever format that is. And that's gotten harder as it's gotten bigger. But I think that's really important in the feedback people give, or when people reach out and say stuff, I internalize it for good and for bad, right? And when people are, I don't read all the TikTok comments, I guess, to be fair. That's an example of, that's a black vortex of Gen Z people very upset with mostly not me, mostly the guest, but going down the rabbit hole of TikTok comments is like a really funny thing.
The most common thread, I would say, on the people getting the rage on TikTok is usually a more tenured CEO talking about like, hey, I expect my employees to like work hard. And people in the comments are just like, well, it's not fucking fair.
Yeah, it's like, typical patriarchal society mindset, capitalism. It's like trying to, whatever. People just like flip out anything. It's when
remote work.
That's my favorite. When a CEO, people have stopped sort of taking bait on that, because I think it's sort of settled out a little bit. When it was up in the air a little bit of how things were going to evolve, if you asked someone and they were like, yeah, I think we want our people coming in person, just TikTok, the Gen Z TikTok people will get so fucking mad about like typical boomer mindset, wanting us to show up to work and be employed. It's like, that is a funny example. But to your point on the comments, I mean, that is an interesting thing. If you're going to do this, and especially if you're going to do what our original product was, which is commentary and opinions and all that stuff, like just be prepared for people to be upset and disagree. Where if you have one opinion, the internet will find the people with the other opinions to argue with you about it, and so that's something you do need to have, even as benign and innocuous as like, interviewing tech executives or investors about their career and their like that's a pretty benign concept, but still people find stuff to be outraged about or criticize you for. Now, the good side of it is, I think for the most part, our listeners, at least the ones that I've interacted with, are all very respectful and thoughtful and considerate and kind.
People that gravitate towards this type of content tend to be people that agree with that sentiment in general.
Yes, I have a friend that does a sports podcast, and it's really big, and it's under the Barstool umbrella, and like the stuff he gets said back, he'll be like, whatever, the Giants sucked yesterday, and his comments are like from Giants fans being like, you suck and you're whatever. It's your parents don't love you, and like it's probably because you were adopted as a child or something. And it's like, all he said was the football team was bad, and so thankfully it's not quite that level, but you'll still get it no matter what content you put out there. You'll get people criticizing, which I think is a feature, not a bug of this. If people are willing to invest the time with you, inevitably, like to have 100,000 people listen, to have 100,000 people listen, if you have a 90% approval rating, that means 10,000 people are going to dislike you in some way, which is that's just a feature of law of large numbers. And 10,000 people saying mean stuff to you can be pretty mean. And if you ever want to be like entertained with that, go to any big podcast or whatever reality show, I'm sure is Reddit subforum or something, or go to the YouTube comments or go to their TikTok page and just read the comments from people that presumably even like the show enough to subscribe to the Reddit forum or something.
Yeah.
And they are just like brutal to the people at all times, right? And so it's something you got to know going in, especially if you're going to have some level of success. I also think that's an important other thing is, what is success for you is an interesting thing to ask yourself going into it, because it can be insatiable of just pursuing the next rung in the ladder of, well, you just want the numbers to go up, right? And to keep bigger, keep growing and be better than before. And at some point you need to acknowledge what success actually looks like and what you want it to be and who you want to emulate, and also when to quit if it's not working, right? And
or if you hate your life.
Yeah, well, which could be not working. Like if it's not working, it could be you're miserable with it, right? And finding something that actually resonates with you, because it is a grind. We said it earlier, but it's 100% like the amount of work. I think next week we have, right now, I think it's 4 separate episodes, 2 hours each. Normally, obviously, number-wise, I don't have all those stacked in together, but just the way the scheduling kind of worked out.
Yeah.
And I'm very underprepared for it, and I need to sit down and do a ton of research, and I'm going to do it over the weekend and spend my whole weekend just kind of listening to other podcasts or reading news articles or just sort of thinking or reaching out to people to ask questions that I should ask. And you need to uniquely enjoy it and also recognize that the journey, no single episode will ever feel fulfilling in it's like, oh yeah, if I just get XYZ guest, it's like, no, the second that episode's published and you get the gratification of it being out there, it's on to the next one. And so I think acknowledging that if you don't enjoy the journey, there's no milestone at the end that you're going to get to that's going to feel like, oh yeah, once you hit whatever 10,000 subscribers, it's like so much better. It's it's not. It's like, it's just the same. The numbers are a little bigger, and there's more people saying nice stuff and more people saying mean stuff, and like that's, maybe you get better guests on, but the process is no different than what it was before.
Well, hopefully this has been some combination of entertaining, educational to our guests. Probably a good opportunity to just thank people that have tuned in and listened to the show. It's grown pretty significantly, especially as we've sort of figured out based on feedback what's worked and what we've enjoyed. So
no, it's been a really fun. I mean, any of the lessons, I guess, that we have here, or postmortem and retrospective, with a caveat that I still think we don't know. We know some things, at least the mistakes we've made, but we still don't know. We don't have it figured out. Like we're certainly not the top charting podcasts in the world or whatever. These are just sort of our own anecdotes, which is, I guess, a good plug to please share with your friends. So we are the top performing podcast in the world. But I think, this is, it's been gratifying doing this, and the people we've met along the way, both on the listener side as well as the guest side. It's been a fun experience. And I think I'm much better as an investor. Interestingly, I got asked the question now of like why I keep doing it by a guest that we're going to have on at some point in the next couple of weeks. He's like, why do you do this? And I was like, I just enjoy it. And I think it makes me a better board member to the companies I work with, both because of the network I've been able to build around it and also the insights. It's one thing to like go learn for the sake of learning. It's another thing to learn to study for an interview with someone.
Right, because you're about to put on a show in front of thousands of guests. Like you're not going to want to look stupid, so you are going to do read every book that
you're going to take notes in a way that goes above and beyond what you would do otherwise. And so I am really appreciative of everyone kind of allowing this to exist because I think, better at my job in a meaningful way as a resource for founders, both because of the network I've been able to build as well as the lessons I've learned along the way. So it's been super fun. So thank you everyone for the journey. And we'll see. I promise there won't be any more navel gazing episodes here for a little while, and we'll get back to your regular scheduled programming by next week. But just thank you to everyone for coming along the way.